Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you're comfy. I hope you have your torches lit because we are heading deep down into the dark, dark Tomb of Giants.
And engage in jolly cooperation.
Okay. Hello. How are we? It's early on a Saturday. Oh, hope you're all doing fantastic. Hope you're all having a lovely day. Last time we did Gravelord Nito, but we have the entirety of the Dark Souls Tomb of Giants expansion left to do. So all these skelly boys, the Black Knight, Necromancers, and 3 characters. What I'm probably most likely going to do is, because skeletons are predominantly the same, I'll probably show how I paint one skeleton, and then you probably pretty much just use that uniformly across all of the skeletons. Pretty quick and easy methods to do, and I will probably mainly focus on painting Black Knight, probably using some contrast and stuff. I'll probably leave the characters for another day. So let's do just that then. So here he is, primed with some grey cere. So, first things first, I think I'm going to do a very rudimentary coating of Leadbelcher, get him metallic-y looking, and then I can apply some black contrast like we did with Malekith to bring this all down to the nice black tone that these knights have. Then we can add some little detailing after. So, Leadbelcher, and I will just slowly start applying some thin coats. Be interested to see how the black contrast paint will react to a lighter undercoat, as opposed with Malekith that had a black primer but a zenithal highlight on top of that. I'm very happy that they did a Tomb of Giants expansion. You know, I definitely think the board game was crying out for some skelly boys and some catacomb-based content. I find it interesting that they went with the Black Knight rather than Pinwheel. I mean, even though he's a bit of a joke of a boss, let's be honest. But I am secure enough in myself to admit to you all that I did die to Pinwheel. It's probably the most embarrassing thing I have to admit for Dark Souls, but actually no, it gets worse because I died to Pinwheel, but I died to Pinwheel in New Game Plus. The funny thing is that I decimated Ornstein and Smaug in New Game Plus without even dying, and then I just kind of ran in guns blazing on Pinwheel, super cocky. I was like, yeah, this will be over and done with in seconds. Yeah, I just got caught lacking and I died to Pinwheel in New Game Plus. It was pretty damaging, I'm not gonna lie. Anyone else died to Pinwheel? Please make me feel better. So there's a first coating of Leadbelcher. Still pretty light due to the bright undercoat underneath. And now we can add in some Black Legion, because the armour is pretty much all the same across this lovely knight. I'm just going to coat the entire thing with Black Legion, and then we can take it from there as to what we decide we want to do. So that is the Black Knight, primed with grey cere, base coated with a very thin layer of Leadbelcher. On top, one thin coat of Black Legion contrast. While the armour, yes, it is black, it's also very obvious that it's still metallic, which is really nice. So to this we can start adding in some details, highlights, shadows, things like that to it to really make this guy pulp. Right, there are different styles I found online for different reference images of the Black Knight, but I found some quite cool looking designs that I think work a little bit better, especially when painting minis where they've got sort of goldish kind of highlights on these sort of like raised edges and things, which I think could work really nicely. So I'm going to take some Retributor armor and a dry brush and just kind of see how dry brushing on a very small amount of gold will react to these decals before I move on to applying it to all of them. You know what? I quite like it. I think it's quite a cool looking effect. I'm just gonna lightly dust on some of this gold around. But like I said, this is a very light dry brushing layer. I've got absolute minimal paint on this brush. It is literally taking quite a few applications of this stroking to even get any paint onto the model. Cool. Yeah, it is quite gold at the moment, so let's get some Nuln oil. I'm gonna pop it on the wet palette so I can just kind of thin it down a bit so I'm not just absolutely loading it on. So that's him with some Nuln oil applied to him. So we'll let him dry. So what I'm thinking I'm gonna do is I have this new metallic paint that I bought called Grey Night Steel, which is a bit of a blue colour. It might be kinda cool to add some edge highlights with this stuff against the gold. It's kinda cool. Kinda like a bit of that. It's an interesting colour. I think it's also quite nice because the gold is obviously quite a warm tone and this grey steel is quite a cold tone, so it gives a little bit of contrast and differentiation between the two. So I'm just using the flat side of the brush, just using it to go over the edges of the shield for now. Yeah, I quite like that. It's kind of give it a nice outline. You slowly start to see that come into life, which is quite nice. I actually really quite like this grey steel colour, so what I think I might do, I'm gonna take some of it onto my dry brush and I'm gonna just kinda dry brush on some highlights to the side. Yeah, that's kinda cool. I kinda like how that's looked. With that in mind, take the grey steel again on my precision brush, just give some edge highlights to these little areas. Quite like the colour differentiation between the cool steel and the warm gold. Whilst I still have time currently, I think that black steel effect is very nice. I really like that a lot. But I'm just going to go back over with a very thinned down amount of Black Legion, just to bring back again. We lost a bit of our shadowing. We can just further enhance it a bit. Just going to tidy up little areas that I might have accidentally got some highlights on that I didn't want to highlight, and bring back some more contrast and shadow to areas that I might have accidentally brightened up a tad too much. Well, I think that's kind of worked out quite nicely. There he is. Like, he's not just fully black. He's got some gold and shine to him. I think that's quite nice. I think it's quite a cool effect. Definitely makes it more interesting than just being black, especially like on the shield here. Like, we've got some different tones and shades of greys and blacks with the middle of gold and the sort of grey steel highlighting, which kind of makes it pop a bit. It's quite nice. Same with the armour. Quite like it. So, with skeletons, these are all the different skelly boys that you get in the Tomb of Giants. So you get little skeletons, little archer, little soldier, and a necromancer. Big skeletons, you get soldier, archer, skelly beast, skelly dog, whatever you want to call them. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably start with skelly dog because it's just bones. There's no weaponry or anything, just the bones. So I'll start with him and I'll talk through the process of what I'm doing to paint a skeleton, and then that process will just be replicated across all of the skeletons, and then using that you should be able to get a nice good looking bunch of bone boys with minimal fuss. So to start, it is my trusty Skeleton Horde contrast paint. Tremendous contrast this is, and with a grey sear underneath, the contrast will react really nicely to this. So just going to give one first good coating of this contrast all over, making sure that the contrast is seeping down into all the little cracks and crevices and gaps within the bones, so you're not getting any primer still shining from underneath, especially because it's lighter primer. It's way more noticeable, which is like one of the benefits of using dark primers like dark greys and blacks, is that, you know, if you haven't managed to reach a certain area, or it's difficult to reach a certain area on a model, at least when it's black, it's not noticeable because it'll just look like shadow. And because it was a hard to reach place, it's probably generating some shadow. Okay, and there we go with the first layer of contrast paint. Honestly, it's such a good contrast that it sort of looks kind of ready to go. You know, if you didn't want to have too much fuss and you just wanted it painted to play with, and you wanted to stick with this, by all means, it's a good looking boy just doing that. So up to you. But what I will do is I will add some extra colours and highlights and shading to it to really make it stand out. But if you wanted to leave it at that with just the skeleton horde contrast paint, you know, I wouldn't come and tell you off, because it looks pretty good. It's a really impressive thing, so yeah. So as you can see, before I moved on, I decided to just paint all the dudes with skeleton horde contrast paint to get them all based with skeleton horde contrast paint. And we'll do some highlighting on the skelly beast. Okay, so for my highlights, I'm going to use a coat of Ushbati bone, which is a nice layer paint, and also some wraith bone, and for some ultra highlights, Korax white. So let's get those three loaded up to the wet palette with a thin, fine brush. I'm just going to start off with Ushbati bone and slowly just mainly target kind of like the middle parts and sort of like slowly start fading them outwards, raised edges, higher parts with this lighter layer. Benefit of using the wet palette is it helps thin your paints, also keeps them from drying out so you can use them for longer without having to use more paint, so it saves your paint, thins your paint, all that good stuff. Okay, so as you can see, it's sort of brightened up upper areas doing that coat of Ushbati bone. With that applied, I will move up through the colours and I'll do a same thing again, just in more concentrated, smaller areas with some wraith bone, and just target brighter areas for reflection, sort of light shining down. So just these sort of top ridges of the ribs and the spine, making sure that it sort of has a nice blend between the Ushbati bone to the contrast skeleton horde base coat as well. Just adds a little bit of dynamism, bit of texture and depth to these bones, just to sort of really elevate that already cool looking skeleton horde contrast. So there he is with some wraith bone. Slowly start to bring those highlights up. And then lastly, I'm going to take the Korax white and really just be quite gentle and careful with this, like a newborn baby. Just carefully caress it on. So just like very tips of the ridges. So realistically, for very cool looking skeletons, you only need 4 colours. You know, you've got your contrast base, you've got your first bone highlight, which can be any sort of mid bone colour like Moorcast bone, Ushbati bone, things like that. And then you've got the sort of actual highlight, which is your sort of wraith bone, your sort of brighter beigey off-white colours. And then for final detailing and highlights, just a nice white. And it'll help just generate a really nice textured lighting look. And that's it really. You just keep it thin, make sure you're not blobbing on a load of paint and going over the previous layers that you've done. Nothing worse than doing that. It'll allow you to add more layers to build up these colours and highlights to areas that you want. And yeah, you should get some pretty good, decent looking bony boys out of it. Yeah, so there we go. Highlighted up. Looking nice and bony. So yeah, I'm going to pop him to one side and I will replicate this across all the skeletons. And I'll check back with you all once I've tackled that. 12 boys to do. Okay, we have all of our skelly boys highlighted in the same fashion as the skelly beast. See, we have highlights going on around them all. Same way we have done for this dude here. So that's all of the bones collectively done, which is quite the feat. And what we want to do is move on to the weapons, and I'm going to keep these relatively simple. So for the shield, it will be snakebite leather. It is good for leather, but it's also good for a base for wood. Take a little bit of that, paint it onto the wood. And then what I will probably do after, but I won't spend any time filming it just because I fear this video will already be quite long going through all these guys. So what I'm doing, I'm just going to base all the wood. So it will be the shield and it will be the bows for the archers will all be based with this same snakebite contrast paint. And then I will use Rhinox hide and Mournfang brown to add midtones and shadows to get a final look. So you can see for the big boys on the bows, same contrast paint again. It's just a nice brown colour, you know, like I have Garagax Sewer and Rattling Grime, but they're very dark, and I would fear that it would just be too much to just generate a nice wooden brown colour. There you go. With this contrast paint, it's really nice because obviously you get a bit of shine to it, you get all the sort of oil going down into the recesses and the sort of shape and the cracks of the wood, so that's a really nice way of doing those kind of things, and it's a really good colour to do that. So I will replicate that across all of the shields and all of the bows. So there's all the bow and shield boys done with snakebite leather, to which I shall highlight and add some midtones to after. But while that's drying, I'm going to move on to the swords. I'm going to base them with some Iron Warriors and get my dry brush, and then with that, just start brushing this on. I'm going to leave like little gaps around on the sword, as you can see here, because then I can just start adding on some brighter metallics like Iron Breakers or Necron Compound, just building up darker areas around as well, just so it's not just one flat metallic colour. Give it at least a little bit of interest to these boys' little weapons. I will do what I just said and take some Necron Compound. You can use any other sort of bright metallic, but this is a dry metallic colour, and it's really bright, vibrant and shiny, and I use it a lot for my sort of metallic highlights if I'm using metallic paints and not doing any sort of non-metallic metal faffing around, you know. And I'm going to replicate that across all of them, but before I move on and do that, last thing left to do, pretty much the same sort of thing. Take some Iron Warriors, detail in the little metal center part of the shield. I'm sure this has a name for it, but hell if I know what it is. Iron Warriors on, and then lastly, just very carefully brighten up some of these edges with some Necron Compound, and take some white, just give a little reflection ball on that center part of the shield. And then I can just sort of edge highlight some white around the shield. There we go, and I'll replicate that boy across all the sword and shield boys. Last thing for the arrows, I actually am going to use some of the Garagax Sewer contrast paint because it is a bit darker, and I thought these arrows were going to be like steel arrows, but I'm looking at them and they do have wooden ridges on them, which obviously you don't get on steel or anything like that. So Garagax Sewer is a much darker brown and will at least stand out a bit from the bow. Like that, at least it's a little bit different. And then we can add some midtones, highlights. To finish off the arrow, we're going to do the same as what we did for the sword. We're going to paint the tip, just the tip. Paint the tip with some Iron Warriors, to which we can then do Necron Compound, Corax White to brighten up a bit. But that's the weapons based. Look pretty cool. I'm going to do all of that across all of them, and we can check back with how they're looking once that's done. Okay, so I've got all of the archer boys, sword boys, all of them done. They're done. With all the main skilly boys done, we can move on to finishing off the necromancer boys. I want to use some Basilicanum Grey. I'm going to use this to base their cloaks. I don't want to give the cloaks much colour. I want to keep them pretty dingy, pretty dark, pretty lifeless. There we go, that's him coated with one layer of Basilicanum Grey. There we go. Two little boys, based with some Basilicanum Grey. What I might go ahead and do is add in some grey highlights using some Ishin Grey. But I'm also going to mix in some Storm Vermin Fur, which is a bit of like a brownish dark grey as well. I'm going to mix in some Dark Reaper, which is a sort of very sort of darkish greyish blue, and some Lauren Forest, which is a sort of muted green, just to kind of add a little bit of colour, but still keep it relatively dark and gross, as they are. Dark and gross little boys. So I'm going to start off with some Ishin Grey. I'm just going to slowly start just building up these colours around. I'm just kind of building up different layers, just stacking them with Ishin Grey. Not over all of them, just differentiating to different parts so they stand out a little bit. So over the sort of hooded shawl type thing over the top here. Then I can move on to some storm vermin fur and just start applying it to different areas to Tahitian grey, keeping it nice and thin so it doesn't absolutely cake it on. Something like that. Next I'm going to add some of the Dark Reaper and just use this to add little specks of colour around. Quite a muted blue, so it should fit quite nicely with the colours that we've already applied. Slowly getting there. Now I'm going to add in some Lauren Forest, just with some little specks of green around. Just I think that's quite a nice colour addition to add in. There we go. Little dingy boy. I'm going to paint in the hair of the skull with some Tahitian grey. I'm gonna take some Aberdeen black, thin it down to a glaze. Just use this to bring in a bit more contrast back into this fella, in and around little creased parts of the cloth, any bits that are sort of like tucked under, away from the light source, which is up above. Last but not least, I'm just gonna do a little bit of highlighting on him. So I'll take some Administratum grey. I can just kind of go along, highlighting these edges that are facing upwards. Okay, one necromancer, done. Bosh. So, here they are. Painted, done, looking bony and scaly. What I did want to do was just do a sort of like rudimentary basing of them, like I painted them black, but I think for something like this, we need a little bit of extra summon. So, what I want to do, I've got some of this Sterland Battlemire, which is a sort of like texture paint that sort of like creates mud. I'm also going to use some yellow turf for that sort of like dead grass look. I also have some fine cinders for all of you Lord of Cinders out there. It's kind of like dark crushed rock, which would look quite nice for this kind of thing, especially like, you know, maybe these kind of guys who are sort of based in the Tomb of Giants and stuff. I think maybe like the Catacombs, I'll use some of these Sterling Battlemire stuff with some of the tufts. Kind of mix and match it around and see what kind of looks good. But one other thing are these Citadel skulls. Now these are really, really great. You get so many. And you can just buy it from Games Workshop. Loads of different options of different animals, beasts, all that kind of thing. Loads of skulls for humans. So I'm going to take some of these and dot them around on different bases to kind of build it up and make it a bit more interesting. So we have these little dudes left. So I'm just going to start getting this stuff applied to the base. There we go. That's one loaded up with it. Yeah. And then it's just a case of just doing that across them all. You definitely want to use an old brush for anything like this that has like texture in the paint, because it will get between the bristles and it will damage them. So you don't want to be using any nice brushes to do this kind of stuff. You will break them instantly. They got a little bit messy around the sides of the bases, but that's okay, because once it's dried we can tidy it up with a bit more Aberdeen black to go around the edges. So now the big scaly chaps, I'm going to get some PVA glue, and I'm just going to cover the bases. Lovely. And with this lovely stuff, oopsie. So with some of this burnt turf, sprinkle it on. So there's our first one. Based with some of this lovely burnt rock kind of stuff. These fine cinders, I think it's called. Next up, the boss and the mini boss. Some more of the cinders on him. Oh dear, oh dear. Oh, that's a lot of glue. Another one turfed, another one. And I think same thing for Nito, like there's not actually a whole lot of base around him. He's taking up pretty much all of it. It's just these kind of like little side bits. And with that, they're all based with some turf. So I'm just gonna let them dry. Okay. Dog walked, bases dried. That is a job jobbed. With these boys is we can just start adding some tufts to them, I think. Beautiful. What a glorious bunch of looking chaps we have here. So lastly, I do just want to add in some final little bits, which is just some of these skulls. So I can just grab some more cast bone, with them being all lined up here. I can just go whap, 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 whap. Job done. There we go. No, I'm joking. Just makes it much easier just to get a bunch done quickly, and then you can break them off once they're dry. Skulls dried. I'm just gonna do a layer of skeleton horde contrast over them. They're only there for decoration. I don't need to do anything insane with them, you know. Let's get our little skulls attached, shall we? So we'll start off with Nito, because he's the main guy that needs them. Cool. Only a couple for him. Do some for the Black Knight. Lovely. So, that about does it. I'm just gonna tidy up. So here they are. Tomb of Giants. Fully painted. Based as well. What a treat it is. Bear with me, because I just need to get the thumbnail shot. That'll do, I think. And with that, that is the Tomb of Giants complete. Nito, Black Knight, big skellies, little skellies, necromancers, all done. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed watching through this. I've tried to kind of split it up so the videos weren't crazy long. Yeah, let me know if you enjoyed it, if it's given you some sort of inspiration to paint your own, if you have the core sets and you're not really too sure where to start. Hopefully this has given you some stepping into the right direction of taking things on if you're not too sure. If it has, please let me know. It's always such a joy to hear when people take things away from this. This brings us to the end of painting the Tomb of Giants core sets. As I said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. That just about does it. So I will see you next time. Toodaloo. And that about does it from future me here as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please be sure to drop this video a like, leave a comment, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'd love for you to join the gang. I will see you all in the next one. Peace out, gang, and don't you dare go hollow.